We want to apologize for the camera angle we had to use to cover the briefing. Problems with the camera at the Pentagon. Sorry about that. You can watch the briefing again at our website. Go to cspan.org. Again, the U.S. Senate coming into session. The House recessed until next week. Senators continue debate today on normalizing trade relations with Russia. A vote on that measure expected shortly after noon today. And now to live coverage of the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. God of wonder beyond all majesty, you alone are worthy of our praise. Stay with us, bringing your grace and gladness to brighten our lives. Lord, remove our sins from us and cleanse us with your Spirit, emancipating us from fears about what tomorrow may hold. Continue to direct the steps of our lawmakers, keeping them from 11th hour decisions that bring unintended negative consequences. Remind them that the cost of indecision may be much higher than they anticipate. Purge them of the things that increase discord, that in unity they may serve you with faithfulness. We pray in your sacred name. Amen.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., December 6, 2012. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Tom Udall, a senator from the state of New Mexico, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader is recognized.
Following leader remarks, we'll be in a period of morning business until 11:45 today. During that period of time, senators will be allowed to speak for up to 10 minutes. Now, it's certainly not mandatory, but we would like that time to be used to talk about speeches of our retiring senators. At 11:45, 11:45, the Senate will move to executive session to consider Walker and Berg nominations, both district court judges from Florida and Michigan, respectively. At about 12:10 p.m., there will be up to 3 roll call votes, first on passage Russia trade, then on confirmation of Walker and Berg. We expect only 2 roll call votes since we hope the Berg nomination will be confirmed by voice. Mr. President, we Democrats have been saying for more than 4 months it's time for the House to pass the middle-class tax cut, which we approved here in the Senate in July. But as the days until the country goes over the fiscal cliff tick by, more and more Republicans have joined our chorus. They realize the Republican leaders' unwillingness to compromise sooner has put them in a real bind. So reasonable Republicans are asking the House leadership to allow a vote on the Senate-passed legislation. What was once a trickle has become more of a flood. Last week, Republican Representative Tom Cole said it was time to give middle-class families certainty their taxes won't go up by $2,200 on an average on January 1st. Then Tim Scott, a Republican, a conservative Republican from South Carolina, admitted the Senate's middle-class tax cut would surely pass the House, since it will take only 26 moderate Republican votes to ensure passage. Mr. President, I don't agree with David Brooks. On occasion, I don't agree with him. Perhaps most of the time I don't agree with him. But no one can ever dispute this columnist for the New York Times, his brilliance in writing. He is a great, great journalist. And he writes so well and so explains things so well. I really have great admiration for him. He wrote yesterday, quote, Republicans have to realize they are going to have to cave in on tax rates. That's the way it is, Mr. President. They're going to have to cave on tax rates. Then on Tuesday, day before yesterday, Senior Senator from Maine, Olympia Snowe, urged House Republican leaders to end the suspense for middle-class taxpayers. They shouldn't have to wonder, Senator Snowe said, whether we will ultimately raise taxes on low to middle-income people. I assure them we won't raise taxes on the middle class and the poor, is what Olympia Snowe said. On Wednesday, Senator Susan Collins, her mate from Maine, joined her colleague from Maine, agreeing the idea of ending the suspense for middle class has merit. Yesterday, it seemed every practical Republican left in Washington was suddenly willing to say out loud what we've known for weeks. The only remaining option is for the House to pass the Senate bill. Dozens of House Republicans signed onto a letter urging Speaker Boehner to take the last exit before the cliff. Neither President Obama nor Democrats in Congress have ever been ambiguous about our proposal to provide economic security for 98% of American families and 97% of small businesses, while asking the wealthiest 2% to contribute just a little more to stop this runaway debt. And now that even a dyed-in-the-wool conservative like Senator Coburn from Oklahoma, he's endorsed the Democratic approach. Here's what he said. I know we have to raise revenue. I would rather see the rates go up, he said, than eliminate tax credits and deductions that benefit the middle class. He's been heavily involved in everything that has happened the last several years in Washington dealing with what to do with the debt. And when he joins in, that's really significant. So it's apparent how this will end. The only question is, when will it end? It's how long will Speaker Boehner make middle-class families wait for relief, and how long will he force the financial markets to wait for uncertainty, continue their uncertainty and wait for certainty? The longer he delays, the greater the risk to our economy. So, Mr. President, John Boehner, who is my friend, I urge him, don't have to listen to me. Listen to your own caucus. Listen to prudent members of your own party around the country. We can argue whether to give more unnecessary tax breaks to the wealthy tomorrow. We can discuss balanced, responsible ways to reduce our deficit next week. We can reform our tax code next year. But we must give economic certainty to the middle class now, today. Democrats agree, independents agree, and the majority of Republicans agree, Mr. President. And the American public agrees by a huge margin. Even dozens of CEOs of major corporations whose personal taxes go up under our plan emphatically agree. I've been saying for weeks, Mr. President, the only people who aren't on board are Republicans in Congress. But now even they're crying out for compromise. I only hope my friend John Boehner is listening. Should we wait?
The Republican leader is recognized.
I suggest the items for quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
President.
Republican leader is recognized.
I ask consent that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Yesterday afternoon, I came to the floor and offered President Obama's proposal on the fiscal cliff to show that neither he nor Democrats in Congress are acting in good faith in these negotiations. With just a few weeks to go before a potentially devastating and entirely avoidable blow to the economy, the President proposed a plan that members of his own party won't even vote for. So I think it's safe to say at this point that the President actually isn't interested in a balanced agreement. He's not particularly interested in avoiding the fiscal cliff, and he's clearly not interested at all in cutting any spending. What the President's really interested in, as we learned just yesterday, is getting as much taxpayer money as he can, first by raising taxes on small business that he believes are making too much money, and then on everybody else. Not so he can lower the debt or the deficit, but so he can spend to his heart's content. For months, the President's been saying all he wants is to raise taxes on the top 2% so he can tackle the debt and the deficit. However, yesterday he finally revealed that's not really his true intent. By demanding the power to raise the debt limit whenever he wants, by as much as he wants, he showed what he's really after is assuming unprecedented power to spend taxpayer dollars without any limit at all. This isn't about getting a handle on deficits or debt for him. It's about spending even more than he already has. Why else would he demand the power to raise the debt limit on his own? And by the way, why on earth would we ever consider giving a president who's brought us 4 years of trillion-dollar unchecked deficits authority to borrow? He's the last person who should have limitless borrowing power. Look, the only way we ever cut spending around here is by using the debate over the debt limit to do it. Now the President wants to remove that spur to cut altogether. Of course, it gets in the way of his spending plans. Well, I assure you it's not going to happen. The American people want Washington to get spending under control, and the debt limit is the best tool we have to make the President take that demand seriously. The American people want us to fight to cut spending. It's a fight they deserve and a fight we're happy to have. Now, Mr. President, I indicated to the Majority Leader I was going to propound the following consent. I'm prepared to ask a consent to allow the Senate to vote on the President's debt limit proposal. I would ask this either as an amendment to the Russian PNTR measure that we will vote on this afternoon, or as a freestanding bill if that is preferred. Therefore, I now ask consent that it be in order to vote on an amendment, which is the President's debt limit extension proposal that I just described prior to the passage of the Russia PNTR bill today.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
Reserving the right I'm sorry. Reserving the right to object, Mr. President. I've been thinking how best to describe what's going on here in Capitol Hill the last couple of weeks. Every morning I get up, the first thing I read is the sports page. I'm disappointed in the sports page in the Washington Post. It's not nearly as good as it used to be, and the New York Times is not very good either, but I read them. That's the first thing I do. There's always some good news on the sports page. And then I go to the front page and get some of the bad news. But I follow sports, no matter what it is, basketball, football, baseball, whatever it is. And I've watched very closely. It's not one of my favorite teams, but it's really, really fun to watch. And that's the New York Jets. New York Jets, yes, New York Jets. Coach Ryan, he's got a problem. He has 3 quarterbacks. Sanchez, he's got a Tim Tebow, he's got a guy by name McElroy. He can't decide who their quarterback is going to be. That's the same problem the Republicans are having. Romney's gone, but he's still in the background. We have McConnell and we have Boehner. Who is the quarterback, Mr. President? Who is the quarterback? Mr. President, my friend talks about the trillions of dollars of debt. Mr. President, we just had an election. The people overwhelmingly know why we have this debt. The polling right before the election showed the vast majority of the American people realized the debt was caused by George Bush. That's a fact. Now, Mr. President, we have created, there will be another jobs report out tomorrow. We had a little problem because of what happened with Hurricane Sandy, but we'll still have about 100,000 new jobs. Private sector job growth has been significant. We're approaching, let's say it must be about 4 million jobs now that have been created. Doesn't nearly make up what was lost during the Bush years, but we're making progress. Mr. President, people in America realize we can no longer have the top-down economy that the Republicans so loved during the Bush years and what they wanted to create again with Governor Romney. So, Mr. President, I'd be happy to take a look at the proposal that my friend, the Republican leader, has shown us. If we could come up with something like we did when they created this other furor by refusing to increase the debt, where we had an ability to come here and have a couple of votes to determine if we were going to increase it. If that's what they want to do again, I'd be happy to seriously take a look at that and report to the White House and my caucus. But until then, I object.
Mr. President.
Objection having been heard.
Mr. President.
The majority
leader indicates there's some confusion about who the quarterback is on the Republican side. That is, of course, quite common when you don't have the White House. But there's no doubt about who the quarterback is on the Democratic side. Quarterback on the Democratic side is the President of the United States. And unfortunately, he keeps throwing interceptions. And we're moving backward and backward and backward toward the goal line. $4 trillion annual deficits, and my friend from Nevada still wants to blame that on George Bush. Look, and now he's asking for an unlimited authority to borrow whenever he wants to, for whatever amount he wants to. If the majority leader supports that proposal, I would hope that we can work together here and get a vote on it, and give his members a chance to express themselves as to whether or not they think that's a good way forward for our country, to give this president or any other president unlimited authority to borrow as much as he wants at any time he wants from the Chinese or anybody else. That's the question.
Majority Leader.
Of course, as I said, we'll be happy to look at the proposal by my friend. But the President doesn't want to do anything other than what we've done before. And that's where we are now, and that's why I'd be happy to take a look at his proposal, because if it's what we did last summer, I'd be happy to take a look at that and move forward on this. We have, Mr. President, it's not only we Democrats, but, we have a long line of Republicans, which I just outlined early on, where people recognize that immediately we need to make sure that the middle class and the poor are taken care of without their taxes being increased. We got Representative Cole, Scott, David Brooks, a columnist from the New York Times, Senators Snowe and Collins and Coburn, and a long list of Republicans are saying, let's move on.
Mr. President, under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 11:45 a.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. reserved for speeches by retiring senators. The senator from Colorado.
Mr. President, I come to the floor this morning, as I have on many mornings, to talk about the wind energy industry and the importance of the production tax credit. But before I begin those remarks, I'd like to associate myself with the Majority Leader's remarks. We do need to extend the tax cuts for the middle class as soon as possible. That's clearly the message the American people sent on November 6th in the nationwide election that we had. I also want to respond to the comments and the conversation between the two leaders over the debt ceiling limit. It's important to recognize that when we raise the debt ceiling, all we are doing is keeping faith with what Congress has already appropriated, what Congress has already made clear we will spend on behalf of our country in all the various ways that the federal government operates. We cannot afford to have a situation like we had August before last, where we dallied and we literally shot our economy and ourselves in the foot by not extending the debt ceiling. We saw one of the rating agencies lower our national rating, first time in history. There's a way to do this, that is to extend have a mechanism in place so that we never again get in a situation where the debt ceiling becomes a point of contention and literally hurts our economy. So I think, again, I want to say the majority leader is on track. Let's extend these middle tax cuts right now, create some certainty, help our economy continue to grow. The majority leader is on point when he shared the numbers. I think that we've seen about 5 million jobs created after approaching literally the Great Recession when President Obama first took office. So let's get that job done. And I have another job I want to see us get done as soon as possible, and that's to extend the wind production tax credit. It expires in less than a month. It's been vital for job creation and for our American manufacturing. Literally, the PTC, the production tax credit, has encouraged the creation of tens of thousands of good-paying middle-class jobs, and it's led to millions in capital investment in states like Colorado. In fact, 48 states have wind energy industry presence in those states. And along with the capital investment, what we've seen is the development of thousands of megawatts of clean, renewable wind power. And if we let this PTC expire, the stakes are really, really high. I've come to the floor 24 times to speak to the importance of the PTC and the benefits it provides for families and businesses in every state across the nation. I'm here because the wind PTC is a critical investment in and a down payment toward a clean energy future, a future for risk if we don't act and don't act soon. But it's not too late to act. It truly isn't. And to give us more motivation to point out what is at risk, I want to focus today on the state of Minnesota, direct my remarks to their wind energy industry. Minnesota's, we know, is the land of 1,000 lakes, and although Minnesota's namesake may be its water, it has become a leader in the wind energy industry and a compelling example of the positive effects that the PTC can have in a state. Let me share some numbers with you to make the point. As of 2011, Minnesota ranks 5th nationally for the most installed wind capacity with over 2,700 megawatts, and it trails only Illinois, Iowa, California, and Texas. You can see all the blue areas on the map. Those are areas in which there's installed wind operations. And in fact, wind energy meets 12.7, I'll round that up, 13% of the state's energy needs, and this ranks 4th among all states. And that means that they're powering through the wind energy industry the equivalent of 770,000 Minnesota homes. And that number's going up. It's growing. Minnesotans, we know through our two colleagues from Minnesota, they take pride in everything having to do with Minnesota, and well, they should. And they are taking pride in being in the forefront of wind power growth. Since 2003, Minnesotans have purchased 1 billion kilowatt hours of energy through WindSource, which is Xcel Energy's voluntary green power program. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means over 20,000 residents and about 240 businesses pay a little extra on their electric bill to support wind energy and show their commitment to a clean energy economy. Mr. President, I know this works because we have a similar program in Colorado. Xcel also has a presence in Colorado, and they offer WindSource to Coloradans. Now, Minnesota's prominence as a wind power state has been aided by the fact that it also has a successful wind manufacturing industry. And those manufacturing facilities in Minnesota have created hundreds of good-paying jobs and new investments. Federal incentives, including the PTC, have played a crucial role in making Minnesota the wind leader that it is today. Now, if that isn't enough, Mr. President, I want to highlight further the substantial benefits that this crucial industry has had on Minnesota. Number one, the wind industry accounts for 3,000 good-paying jobs, for hardworking Minnesotans, including jobs at the state's 16 wind manufacturing facilities. You can see all these circles. The green circles are where those manufacturing facilities are located. The workers at these plants and the facilities themselves help supply and maintain wind projects that contribute $7.6 million annually in property taxes. Those projects are, in effect, providing local communities with funds to help improve schools, roads, and all the other crucial services that local governments provide. Furthermore, Minnesota's strong manufacturing industry has supported rapid growth in the wind capacity of the state. So let me share those numbers with you. In 2011, the state added 542 megawatts of wind power capacity, the fourth most of any state. So extending the PTC is crucial to continuing Minnesota's growth in wind energy and making progress towards a clean energy economy. And in fact, the Minnesota utility, Northern States Power, will have close to 1,900 megawatts of wind in their energy portfolio by the end of this year, by the end of 2012. And listen to this. In 2011, the utility got more electricity from wind than it did from natural gas. And I know many of us who can see or think, understand what the future could hold based on what experts are telling us, know that wind and natural gas will be partners going forward. There's a synergy between wind and natural gas. This really stands out as an important milestone for Northern States Power. This company's investment in wind energy has helped reduce carbon dioxide emissions by an estimated 3.1 million tons. So the leadership of companies like Northern States Power demonstrate that when we invest in clean energy, we are creating jobs and strengthening our energy security at the same time. So, Mr. President, I want to close with a couple of comments more broadly. Minnesota is not alone in its success. But these gains and the thousands of jobs that the PTC supports are at risk if we don't act. And during the summer and the fall work period, we saw the effects of not extending the production tax credit. Companies like Vestas in Colorado announced layoffs and pulled back capital investments. It's pretty simple, Mr. President. The production tax credit equals jobs. We need to pass it as soon as possible. Enough is enough. If we don't extend it, we're going to see very, very significant continuation of these job losses. So let's find a way forward. Let's work together. Let's extend the PTC. The longer this extension is delayed, the quicker success stories from states like Colorado and Minnesota could disappear. We simply cannot let this happen. Let's extend the PTC as soon as possible. Mr. President, thank you. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Missouri.
Mr. President, I'm pleased that the Senate's considering a critical bill this week to establish permanent normal trade relations with Russia. I should have borrowed our friend's sign that said PTC equals jobs, which may very well be an accurate equation, but PNTR also will equal jobs. We can compete given the opportunity to compete, and that's what these trade relationships are all about. This legislation overwhelmingly has passed the House. It's going to have strong bipartisan support here in the Senate, and I believe will pass today and needs to pass today. Russia joined the World Trade Organization in August of 2012. And since that time, our exporters, U.S. companies, have not been able to take full advantage of the fact that they have this new way to get to the Russian market because we haven't granted permanent normal trade relationships to Russia. Since all the other major WTO members have already got that permanent relationship, they've had a real advantage since August of last year as they can move forward immediately and compete and make agreements that American companies can't make. American companies are the only companies losing market share after Russia joined the World Trade Organization. And not because they're not as competitive, because until we do what we need to do here today, they've been working at a real disadvantage. In addition to securing a level playing field for American companies, we also need to replace the Jackson-Vanik policy with something that frankly has now more real-world potential and real-world understanding. Russia is clearly not the Russia of Soviet days. But, Mr. President, we still have reasons to be concerned about individual freedom of expression in Russia. We need to express that concern. That's why I'm in support of a portion of this bill that Senator Cardin and Senator Kyle have fought for during this whole discussion and now have in this bill, in the House bill, the portion where we look at the terrible treatment and ultimate death of Sergei Magnitsky, and this provision will ensure that those who were complicit in those activities and in his ill treatment and death don't get a free pass, and it sends messages to other countries that while we want to trade with you, we also want to continue to speak strongly for the rights of individuals, no matter where they are, to speak up against their government. Normalizing trade relations with Russia is also an important move to my state, and I assume all our states. I know in Missouri we exported $86 million to Russia in 2011, and exports are up 6% already from that year since we started 2012. Worldwide, Missouri exports more than $12.3 billion in goods and services, or at least we did in 2010, and almost half of that was exported to countries where we have free trade agreements, and we need to continue to do that. Nearly 300 Missouri companies supported over 32,000 supported 32,000 jobs that were driven by exports. 32,000 people in Missouri have jobs because of trade, and a lot of that trade, frankly, is in our hemisphere. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. I'm concerned on the Russian agreement that Russia has failed to agree to bring its animal health and food safety measures in line with the WTO agreement on the application of sanitary and phytosanitary measures. It's called the SPS agreement. I'm going to continue to monitor this situation and ensure that American agricultural exports, and pork would be a really good example of this, don't face market access barriers in Russia. Free trade has to be fair trade. Free trade doesn't work if it's not fair trade. If it's fair trade and free trade, American workers and American companies can and do actively and positively compete all over the world. In fact, we have a little bit of a trade imbalance these days, and we should be concerned about it, but 57% of it is in energy. If we'd become more energy self-sufficient, we could easily reduce our trade imbalance by 50%. If we just got North American energy as our focus for energy, we'd not only be more secure, but we'd also have a better trade relationship. This legislation, Mr. President, what we're dealing with today, Russia PNTR, builds on the progress we made last year with the passage of 3 free trade amendments. Many of us on this side work closely with our friends on the other side and the White House to get these long negotiated deals passed. In the 6 months since our free trade agreement with South Korea took effect, trade between our two countries has increased by over $30 billion. $30 billion increase in 6 months. As we're trying to figure out how to grow our economy, the export world and free trade is one of the places that we can go and have the most speedy application of what we do to grow our economy. $30 billion in Korea alone. American exports to Colombia have increased 20% since that free trade agreement took effect. The ratification of the Panama Free Trade Agreement just went into effect a few weeks ago, but that enables American firms to fully participate in the economic opportunities that will occur with the expansion of the Panama Canal and the continued growth of that economy. What happens there is critical to us. I believe this agreement, which I've said already has passed the House, will pass the Senate today. I think there are other things we can and should do. We need to work with the President, and the President should be working with Republicans and Democrats who are friends of trade to do several things. One would be Trade Promotion Authority. We used to call this fast track. This is where the administration can negotiate an agreement, and then the House and Senate either vote yes or no on that agreement. It's the only way to get agreements done in the world we live in today. Right now, the administration has no realistic way of passing trade agreements through the Congress. The President needs to work with Congress so that we'll give him the authority. He needs to ask for it, and he needs to really want it so that we can have these agreements. This gives our trading partners the confidence they need to make the concessions that you make in negotiation and know that the agreement is going to be the agreement. It's either going to be that agreement or no agreement at all. Since the TPA lapsed in 2006, we haven't negotiated a single new free trade agreement since the lapse of TPA in 2006. If that doesn't tell you how important it is that we move back to a way to get these agreements done, I don't know what would. Second, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. These negotiations seem to me to be languishing right now and need senior administration attention in order to gather the steam they need. A strong Trans-Pacific Partnership is the most effective way to consolidate our leadership in that part of the world at a time when China is aggressively moving into East Asia. We also need to look at the Philippines. Senator Inouye and I have a bill that would strengthen our relationship with the Philippines called the SAVE Act. I'd like to see the administration work with the two of us to see what we could get done to have that relationship that's been so strong and has lasted so long become even closer as we figure out how to trade with that economy in a way that makes them more stable and closer friends of the United States. And frankly, we will benefit as our workforce will benefit from that agreement. There's a transatlantic trade agreement that puts us in a better situation to trade with the European Union. This should be one of the easiest agreements we've ever done because you have two mature economies trying to trade with each other. The normal negotiations about labor and environment and other things that sometimes take so long in these agreements, frankly, shouldn't take long. Mr. President, you spent a lot of time with our NATO partners, and they'd be the same partners that would be our EU trading partners if we'll move forward there. And finally, let me say, we need a fresh trade policy for the Americas. We now have trade agreements with 6 countries that were part of the Dominican Republic CAFTA agreement. We have Mexico, Canada, Panama, Colombia, Chile, and Peru. We have a trade preferences agreement with Haiti, but we really need to look to see what we can do to trade in this hemisphere, improve our economic relationship with the South American giant country and giant economy of Brazil. Your best trading partners, Mr. President, should be your neighbors. And certainly Canada and Mexico have proved that. When we send Canada $1, they traditionally send us back somewhere in the neighborhood of $1. Right now it's about 91 cents. Our trade with Mexico, Mexico now sends us back 70, or at least a year ago, and probably this number continues to grow, was sending back 75 cents. That's why on the energy front, when you deal with them, it makes a difference. So they've proven that your neighbors should be your best trading partners. Now I think we need to look...
Senator's time has expired.
30 seconds?
Without objection.
We need to look at at expanding the economic partnerships to our neighborhood. The Western Hemisphere needs more attention. Trade makes sense for America. Trade creates jobs. Trade creates opportunity. I'm glad we're voting on this trade agreement today, and I would yield back.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maine is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, many of our colleagues will be leaving us at the end of this Congress, and I wish to take time this morning to pay tribute to some of my colleagues, particularly those with whom I've worked most closely. And of course, I must start with my colleague and friend from Maine, Olympia Snowe. Mr. President, in ancient Sparta, there was a saying that roughly translated as this: "It seems all the world knows what is the right thing to do, but it is only the Spartans who will do anything about it." As my friend, colleague, and senior senator from Maine, Olympia Snowe, ends her service in the Senate, I rise to pay tribute to this descendant of that legendary civilization. Olympia is a true leader who has always devoted her considerable intellect, energy, and commitment to doing what was right for Maine and for America. Olympia Snowe has dedicated her life to public service. 18 years in the United States Senate, preceded by 16 representing Maine's 2nd Congressional District, plus 5 in the Maine legislature, add up to a remarkable record of commitment to our nation and the great state of Maine. But that span of nearly 4 decades tells us only part of the story, for Olympia has truly set the gold standard for public service. From the State House to the U.S. Capitol, Olympia has built an outstanding reputation as an informed, thoughtful, and effective legislator. She can always be counted on as a leader with integrity who pursued solutions and who had no interest in just scoring partisan political points. It is Olympia's character that has made all that difference. Mr. President, the private acts of public figures can tell you a lot about their character. So I want to share with my colleagues this morning a story about Olympia Snowe that I witnessed personally. There was a Republican fundraiser going on one night, and I was arriving late, driving up in a car. People were streaming out of the fundraiser, and each of them was passing by a man who was on crutches with only one leg, clearly destitute, clearly down on his luck, who was asking for money. Everybody but Olympia Snowe passed him by without a word, as if he were invisible. Olympia went over to this destitute man on crutches with one leg, and she not only handed him some money, but she took the time to talk with him. And I think that tells you so much about who Olympia Snowe is. Her kindness to this individual when everyone else was passing him by. Her kindness to him when no one was watching. Her kindness to him was a private act that told all of us so much about her character. With her retirement from the Senate, Olympia Snowe will join the pantheon of great leaders that our state has produced. Margaret Chase Smith, Ed Muskie, George Mitchell, and Bill Cohen. All of them, like Olympia, exemplify the principle that public office is a sacred trust. Olympia's inspiring record of service is but part of an even more inspiring life story. Several times from childhood on, Olympia has been visited by tragedy that would have caused most people to become discouraged, disheartened, and negative. But each time Olympia rose up, transcended her personal tragedy, and was more determined than before to succeed and to contribute to a better life for others. Her well-deserved popularity among Maine people transcends party lines and is testament to her strength and her spirit. The people of Maine and America are grateful for her many years of service. I am grateful for her leadership and her friendship, and I know that Olympia Snowe will continue to influence national policy for many years to come. Mr. President, we have a tradition in the Senate of referring to our colleagues on the Senate floor during debate as my friend from this state or my friend from that state. And oftentimes the word friend really just means colleague. But there is a fellow senator whom I call friend in the truest sense of the word. And that person, Mr. President, is the senior senator from Connecticut, my dear friend, Senator Joe Lieberman. When Joe Lieberman announced early last year that he would not seek re-election to the Senate, he called himself a lucky guy for having had the opportunity to serve his state and his country. I would contend that it is we in this chamber and the people throughout Connecticut and across our nation who are the ones who are truly fortunate for Joe Lieberman's lifelong commitment to public service, including his 24 years here in the Senate. For more than a decade, it has been my privilege to serve with Joe as the leaders of the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. Regardless of who has been chairman and who has been ranking member, ours has been a partnership. And indeed, Mr. President, I'll never forget when I was losing the chairmanship because of the change in control, Joe leaning over to me and saying, "Don't worry, Susan, all that will change is that you'll pass me the gavel." It was typical of his thoughtfulness and generosity. And it is not coincidental, Mr. President, that ours is the only committee in the Senate where we do not sit with Republicans on one side and Democrats on the other, but instead are interspersed because we recognize, given our important mandate, that we must work together in a bipartisan and indeed a nonpartisan way. During the time that Joe has been the chairman, and that we have worked together, the committee has established a well-deserved reputation for bipartisanship, for thoroughness, and most important, for getting things done. I know the American people have been so frustrated with the gridlock that has prevented action on so many issues facing our nation. Well, for the most part, you do not see that kind of stalemate on our committee, and that is a tribute to the leadership of Joe Lieberman. That reputation for our committee of accomplishment and bipartisanship is the work of many hands, but Joe Lieberman's fingerprints are all over it. Joe has always based his leadership on his unwavering belief that the great challenges that America faces, such as combating terrorism, putting our fiscal house in order, and defending freedom, transcend party lines. The success that our committee has achieved in helping to safeguard our nation is the result of that nonpartisan, some might say independent, spirit that guides him. And those successes are many. From the landmark Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act to providing the tools to strengthen our first responders, to our extensive investigations into the flawed response to Hurricane Katrina, the fatal communication failures in the Fort Hood terrorism case, and our current scrutiny of the attacks in Benghazi, Joe Lieberman has always put country first. His actions are guided by deeply held principles and aimed toward progress. He has demonstrated his willingness time and again to risk his political career to do what he believes is right for America. Joe brings the same dedication to everything he does. Working with him on the Armed Services Committee, I know firsthand how devoted he is to our men and women in uniform and the deep respect he has for their service and their sacrifice. His leadership in bringing about the repeal of the discriminatory Don't Ask, Don't Tell law was nothing short of extraordinary, and it gives me great personal pride to have assisted him in achieving that important victory for justice. And it was vintage Joe Lieberman. He did what was right, he never gave up, and he got the job done. Throughout his many years of dedicated service, Joe has demonstrated the kind of character that America needs and that the American people deserve. It is not by coincidence that the PowerPoint slideshow that I present to students throughout Maine includes a photograph of Senator Joe Lieberman at work. The young pupils of today, who will be the leaders of tomorrow, could have no better role model than this leader of intelligence and integrity. A wonderful fringe benefit of working so closely with Joe for so many years has been the opportunity I've had to get to know his wonderful wife, Hadassah. She is a person who also demonstrates remarkable strength and compassion. Her devotion to community service spans a range of issues, from advocating for women's health and breast cancer research to providing women with opportunity through microfinance programs. The integrity and decency that Joe brings to public service stands on the unshakable foundation of his deep faith. It is telling that his retirement announcement included these wise words from Ecclesiastes: "To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven." And so, in closing, I offer my dear friend this traditional Jewish blessing. May you live 120 years. While none of us expects to attain the longevity achieved by the prophet Moses, I am confident that the gratitude of the American people for the service of Senator Joe Lieberman will be everlasting. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, in reflecting on Senator Jon Kyle's service to this institution and to our nation, I'm reminded of these words by Abraham Lincoln. He said, "Character is like a tree and reputation like a shadow. The shadow is what we think of. The tree is the real thing." Mr. President, Jon Kyle is the real thing. During 18 years in the Senate, preceded by 8 in the House, Jon has built a reputation that is a perfect image of his character. National magazines have named him one of America's 10 best senators, one of the world's most influential people, and one of our nation's hardest working lawmakers. His unanimous election in 2008 as our Republican whip and his recognized leadership on the great challenges of our time throughout the Senate reflect the esteem in which he is held on both sides of the aisle. These accolades confirm what we who have had the privilege of working closely with Jon know from experience. He is intelligent, he is informed, and he is fair. He is dedicated to the people of Arizona and exemplifies the principles that are the foundation of our Constitution and of our country. Of all the words that have been used to describe Jon Kyle, these 5 describe him best: as good as his word. Joe has been an invaluable ally in the great challenge of defending America against terrorism, a challenge that he recognized and worked hard to address long before the terrorist attacks of more than a decade ago. As the leader of the Judiciary Committee, he worked hard to strengthen our intelligence capabilities and was at the forefront of one of the most crucial anti-terrorism issues: tracking, exposing, and cutting off financial networks that bankroll terrorism. Combating this financing was one of our earliest and greatest anti-terrorism successes, although work continues today. And it was Jon Kyle who played a key role. Now, Mr. President, Arizona, like Maine, has a long international border. The American people fully understand the importance of borders that are closed to our enemies as they remain always open to our friends. Jon is dedicated to providing those who protect our borders with the personnel, the training, and the technology so that America can continue to welcome with compassion those seeking a better way of life while turning away those who would do us harm. As a member of the Finance Committee, Jon Kyl has been one of the Senate's most diligent fiscal watchdogs. He has a sharp eye for wasteful spending. He is dedicated to reining in deficit spending, reforming our tax code, and making government more accountable. Jon Kyl understands the challenges that confront America, and he also empathizes with the challenges that confront American families. His record is one of strong advocacy for our most vulnerable citizens, including victims of crime, children, and our seniors. Jon often compares his work in the Senate to that of a teacher. Whether addressing constituents or colleagues, he strives to educate with facts, with evidence, and with the truth. None of us has ever heard Jon try to win an argument by belittling or berating an opponent. It is simply not in his character to do so. Mr. President, it has been said that a politician thinks of the next election, a statesman of the next generation. This statesman from Arizona expresses his philosophy of government and the obligation of government leaders this way, quote, "We owe future generations the chance to live their dreams, to be successful, and most important, to achieve true happiness by their own efforts," end quote. Senator Jon Kyl's commitment to the security of our nation, to fiscal responsibility, and to helping those in need have earned him a reputation that is worthy of his character. The people of Arizona and America are grateful for his service, and I am thankful for his guidance over the years and for his friendship. We wish him all the best to come in the years before him. Mr. President, there's one more tribute that I'd like to give this morning if there is time remaining. Could the chair inform me if we're under a time agreement?